Well, good morning. Today, I want to talk a little bit about some other suggestions on how to approach your first paper. So this video is not going to be about the structure of the essay or what to put where or suggestions on ideas for it. That's in the video from last week. And actually the Toni Morrison video from last week also sort of gets into those ideas. This one is going to be on more general questions that I've gotten over the last week and a half, 2 weeks of the class from a lot of you that are, getting back into writing, maybe hadn't done an essay in a while, or even if it's only been since May, it still takes a little bit of time to get back into the rhythm of writing, especially for college classes. If you're new to college, or even if you've taken other college classes and you haven't done a lot of writing, the first couple of papers in English 101 can be a little challenging because you got to establish a schedule and you got to figure out how to fit in the writing along with your other classes and your work responsibility. So take your time. That's the first thing that I'll mention with this paper, but I'm going to give you some other suggestions in this video on how to approach this first paper, more generally speaking. So again, not the structure of the paper specifically, but just how to approach the writing of it, how to manage your time effectively as you're working on this. And I'm hoping that my suggestions here will also help you in your other classes, whether you're writing papers for them or not, as we get further here into the semester. So the first thing I want to do is tell a story about a time when I was working as a writing tutor. So my sophomore year of college, which is almost 30 years ago, fall of 1992, I started working as a peer tutor in our writing center on campus at Dartmouth. I'd been recommended the year before by one of my English professors who didn't always give me great grades on my papers. I want to stress that, but I very vividly remember it was my middle of my sophomore year. I had a literature class, I think the first one that I was taking for what became my major when I decided to switch into English from studio art. And I had a professor very kindly took me aside one day after class. I didn't do very well on this paper. I think we were one or two papers into the course. And he stopped me as he was turning the papers back. And it was a fairly large lecture hall class. It wasn't a small class, because again, this was a major course. It wasn't an introductory course like this one, which I had taken already. This was, again, halfway through my senior or freshman year of college. He took me aside and he said, Brian, I read your paper and the first half is excellent. You're a very good writer. The second half is a disaster. It's not very good. It doesn't have an ending. And the ending that it tries to have doesn't really work. But you seem like you're talented. So I'm going to recommend you for a position at the Writing Center, because I think you'll also learn more as a writer if you're having to help other people with their writing. And I was very flattered by this. In fact, I tried to thank him, and he was very austere, kind of very gruff, but kind. And he said, "Oh, you don't need to thank me. Just do better on your next paper. Make sure the ending is stronger in the next one, and do a good job as a tutor." I wrote him a letter actually a few years ago thanking him for that recommendation to the Writing Center, because it got me started as a teacher and a tutor. And he wrote me a very kind letter back and said, "Oh, I keep notes on all my students, and I do remember you being a talented writer. You just needed to develop your talent." So anyway, he recommended that I work for the Writing Center. So I got that job. I did some training for it. I started in my sophomore fall semester of college, fall of 1992, long before most of you were born. And I remember vividly when I had that job, I had a student, and you have to remember this was a peer. So these are other undergraduates. So if I'm a sophomore, I worked all through college at the Writing Center. And we typically, got people that either were in our class or as often were older than we were. So maybe you'd have a senior come in with their paper, or a junior who was working on some paper for a class, and then we'd have to read it for them. And make suggestions and try to help them as best we could when they would come into the Writing Center, which is why I also recommend to make appointments with the Writing Center online for additional help, because they're good. We have a good center at Harper, and they're always willing and happy to help you with another opinion on your writing. But I made a critical mistake when I was working as a tutor one time, when one of the students who came in, who was, I think, at least a year ahead of me, I don't remember now what year they were. I think at that point I may have been a senior or junior. Again, it's a long time ago, so I don't remember all the details. But what I do remember is this: student came in, paper was due the next day, and I hadn't had a lot of other experiences like that. My experiences as a tutor with that, a lot of the students that would come for help were working well in advance, like I did with my papers, because maybe they wrote more slowly as I did, or maybe they went to their professors first and only came to us at the very end of the process when they'd already gotten a lot of feedback. But over the years, I'd occasionally get a student that would come in day before the paper was due, hadn't done any work on it, and wanted help and suggestions. And this happened with a student who was in an engineering class, and they had to write a paper for this engineering class. And they came into the tutoring center, and the first thing they said to me was, "This paper is due tomorrow. You have to help me. I've started it, but I don't have any idea what I'm writing about." And as soon as they told me it was engineering, I said, "Well, I'm an English major, so I'll do the best I can to help you with structure. I'm not going to know the content." And they said, "Don't worry about that. I'll worry about the content, but if you can help me with ideas on structure and transitions or an outline even, that would be great." And I said, "Oh, no problem. I can do that. Give me the gist of what it is you're working on, and I can give you suggestions." So we did that. And then at the end of the session, student felt better. They said, "Oh, I feel confident now. I'm going to go back to my dorm room and I'm going to write this paper and I'm going to do well on it." And I said, "Okay, that sounds good." But they did ask me, based on their outline and based on some paragraphs they said, "What grade do you think I'm going to get on this paper?" And this is where my critical mistake came in. I sat there. I had never been asked that before, especially on any paper, because I was another undergraduate who was working in the writing center. And so I paused and I felt bad for this student. And I said, "Well, maybe I should be encouraging." So I said, "Well, if you keep it up, I think you can get an A on the paper if you work as hard and you work through this outline." And they said, "Oh, great. Thank you so much for the support, the suggestions, the encouragement." And I went back to my dorm room, worked on whatever paper I was probably working on for my classes, or went to band practice or something with my guitar. And I was like, "Oh, okay, I did some good work today." And at this point, I'd already decided I was probably going to go into teaching too. So I felt like I'd had an accomplishment. Well, about a week later, I got called by my boss, the head of the writing center, who called me in. I didn't know what it was for. I thought maybe, in my naive 21-year-old thinking, I said, "Oh, I'm gonna get encouraged. I'm gonna be told how great a tutor I was at this session," and I got in trouble. It was not praise at all. The boss of the writing center pulled me aside. I came into her office, and she said, "Brian, did you tell this student they were going to get an A on this engineering paper?" I said, "Well, I was trying to be encouraging." I said, "If they did the work, I thought they could get an A." And she said, "Never do that, because this student came back to us a couple of days ago and got a D on that paper. And so now they're blaming you for it because they say that you encourage them too much." And so anyway, this conversation went on for a while, and I don't think I ever saw or talked to the student again. And my boss was nice. She said, "Look, just don't talk about grades at all until you're a professor. Then you can talk about grades." But here's the thing. Even after all these years later, and again, that experience was, almost 30 years ago now, I don't like discussing grades. I'll have students that say to me, "Well, I've done this draft of the paper, and can you tell me what you think? Can you tell me, will I get an A on it? Will I get a B on it?" And I say, "Look, I don't discuss grades. Okay. I'm not going to know how the paper is until it's done, until it's passed in, and there's no more editing to be done." I said, speculating purely on grades doesn't make for good writing, to be perfectly honest, because that's not what the process is about. The grade is great. It's great when you get a good one. But after that experience and after being scolded by my boss, I don't like discussing grades. And there's a deeper reason for that. And the reason for it is it gives people how should I put this? Their expectations rise, and their focus is only on the grade. So they're sort of imagining what an A paper would be like, but they're not actually doing the work that would maybe get them the A paper. Now, what do I mean by that? And this is not to say I don't discuss grades, obviously, at this point. When they come in, if you ever have a question on what your grade point average is, or when you get a paper back from me, and you're not sure about the grade, or you wonder why you got it, please ask me. I'm happy to talk about it. But I don't like discussing grades before the paper is done and before the paper comes in, because it sets up sort of false expectations. Now, why is that? Well, let me give you some other pointers. And if I'd only done this 30 years ago with this other student, I wouldn't have gotten in trouble for this engineering paper. So here's some other pointers that I want to talk about. And these, hopefully, as I said, will be helpful to you in your other classes and any other time you've got any other kind of writing assignment, whether it's at school or whether it's at work. So here's these 4 pointers I want to mention about the writing process, particularly as an undergraduate, as you're doing these kind of papers. First thing, read the directions. Now, that sounds very simplistic. I said that last week in the other video I did, but you're going to find that in a lot of cases, a lot of your questions will be answered by the directions themselves. So don't skip the directions. I have a lot of students, especially in 101, sometimes in 102, who will even start writing papers without even having read the directions. They'll watch a video, or, we're in an in-person class, they'll hear me talk about the paper, and they think they've gotten the basic idea for it, and they start writing. And then I'll read a draft and I'll say, well, this doesn't really answer any of the questions on the prompt. And they'll say, well, I haven't really read the prompt yet. I just looked to see how many pages you wanted me to write. That's not a good plan. So like I said, read the directions, because the directions in most cases, not in all, every class is different, but in my case, everything you need to know is on the directions, and they're a little bit longer, but it's worth reading them. Take notes, get your highlighter out. I always keep a couple of highlighters on my desk so I can highlight whatever it is that I'm being asked to do. In my case, when it's an editor asking me to do something for a particular writing project, I make sure I underline everything so I have a sense of what they want me to do. And then if I have to ask them a question, I have a better sense of what the parameters are, or how many words they want, what the topic is. So do that, read the directions, take some time. That's the first thing you should do before you do anything else with the paper, aside from doing the reading for it, the essays we're reading, but read the directions too. That's really critical. And if you can get into the habit of doing that for all of your classes, you're going to be better off. And then when you ask questions to your professor, which I'm going to get to also in a second, you're going to have a good foundation. You're going to say, okay, I've read these directions and I'm not sure what you mean by this, but can I try this, or can I make it this length, or whatever the question is? Okay, so read those directions. Now, the next thing, this is tough, I know, for a lot of people. So this is a bit of advice I know whenever I give it, even my colleagues don't like this. Start early if you can. So in other words, when you get a paper assignment, in our case, you're always going to have, as you've seen, at least 2 weeks to do an assignment. I'll put up the new one as soon as these first papers come in. So start early, read the directions, start thinking about it, start drafting it. I know I have a lot of students, and as I said, some colleagues too, who swear by the fact that if they write the paper a day before, 2 days before, they do better because they have that pressure and they feel like that pressure motivates them. That could be the case. Again, I think everybody's different. Everybody has a different writing method. I certainly don't want to discourage you if that's the way you work better. But in my experience, I find that it's the work is better if you started early, because especially as an undergraduate, you're going to have other assignments that oftentimes will come out of nowhere, where maybe the professor hasn't prepped you for them, or says, okay, by Friday, I want this. What I always try to do in my English classes, and this is the way mine ran when I was an undergraduate, is to give you that lead time so that you've got at least 2 weeks to think about the paper, to do the readings, to do a draft, to share a draft with me. It gives you time to share a draft with the Writing Center. So do that, for all your papers. Start them early. If you think that you do better when you procrastinate and you do it at the last minute, again, it's possible. I know for me as a slower writer, I was just saying this to a friend of mine this morning, a colleague at another college, and we were talking about our writing methods. And I say, I have to start early because I write pretty slowly. So even when I was your age as an undergraduate, I typically would start as soon as I got an assignment. Doesn't mean I'd write the paper, the day I got it, but I would start making an outline, taking notes, because I needed that time to work slowly and carefully. So try it. Again, you're going to have at least 2 weeks to write all these papers. So try to start them a little bit early so that you don't get caught up doing them last minute when you got all these other assignments that came in. Another suggestion I have that I have found that helps me is this third one, which is don't always start the paper from the introduction. Now that may sound strange because I'm sure you were taught, and this is not a bad thing, to start from the intro, to have a strong intro and a strong thesis. And you do need to have that. But it doesn't mean during the writing process that you have to start from the beginning, go through the middle, and go to the end. I find in my writing, and I discovered this probably when I was a sophomore in college. I was so used to high school where they would tell us, okay, start with a good thesis, do that paragraph first, and then get into the middle and to the end. And I did that for probably my first year of college, but I found that I was starting to struggle with longer papers because I would often have research, for example, and it would be difficult to come up with a thesis right off the top of my head until I'd kind of written more of the body of the paper. So again, maybe some of you have tried this, and it's a recommendation that I got from a couple of professors, and I think from a couple of writing tutors that I had when I was an undergraduate and also going to the Writing Center. And they said, you know what, if you're stuck, don't start with the intro. You have a placeholder introduction that you're going to get rid of. just write some basic ideas down for your introductory paragraph, maybe 3 or 4 sentences, and then get into the middle of the paper, right from the middle to the end, and then go back to the beginning and change the intro. Or, go to the end and use I had a professor one time tell me this, use your conclusion paragraph of your draft and flip it, make that the introduction, and then do a new ending. Now, the thinking behind that is that if you imagine writing a paper, as a friend of mine once said, as a kind of a journey, you may not really know what your main idea is until you get to the end of that journey, until you get to a rough final paragraph. And I find that a lot, even at my age and in my experience as a writer. I often will work from the middle. I have a really rough intro, and then I work from the middle section of the essay, and then I get to the end. And often in the ending, that's where I discover my thesis or my main idea. So it may sound a little odd because it may sound like you're doing things out of order, but that's a way to try it. Again, start from the middle, get the basic ideas down, get to the ending, and then go backwards and see if you can then change or adapt or expand on your introduction. So in other words, if you think you're getting stuck because of trying to come up with this brilliant thesis, don't force yourself to do it at the start of the paper. Let it sit, let it simmer a little bit, and then work again from the middle backwards. This works really well with drawing, by the way, too. If any of you are also draw, you'll know that it's not like you can come up with a painting in an hour or something, right? You need to plan it out. You need to sketch it out, maybe layer the colors, layer the ink that you're using. So again, maybe it's my art background, but I still think of that with writing, is how I try to layer things in the same way I would when I'm drawing. I got my drawing table over here. I'll show it to you real quick on my desk, doing some paintings of some stuff from the garden. And so even with this, I'll do the pencils first, and then I gradually build it. So I don't do them very quickly, even if it's a relatively simple drawing of my, some of the flowers in my herb garden or something, or my back garden. Anyway, let me sum it up because I have one other suggestion, then I'll wrap this up. Ask for help. Okay, so of these 4 items, again, read the directions, try to start your assignment early. Don't necessarily force yourself to come up with a brilliant thesis right off the bat. Try to write more of the middle and end of the paper, and then go back and fix the intro. And then please ask for help. As I said, make an appointment with the Writing Center. Email me. We can do a Zoom meeting. Again, every couple of weeks, every 2 or 3 weeks, I do open office hours on Zoom. But even if it's a week where we're not doing that, like this week, I may not, I'm still happy to meet with you over Zoom. If you want me to go through a draft, or if you just want to send me one and have me take a look at it, that's no problem. I'm happy to do that. Now, one last thing I'll mention with drafts: the sooner you can get them to me, the more commentary that I can give you. If it's getting close to the deadline for a paper, I'm still going to try to read your draft when it comes in, but keep in mind that I'm going to have drafts from other classes. I'm also going to be probably grading papers from other classes, especially as we get further into the semester here. So the earlier you can get me a draft, the better my comments and suggestions are going to be, because I'm going to get them to you. But the earlier that I have the draft, the more I have some mental energy to think about it, particularly if I'm looking at other drafts and reading papers for other classes. So keep that in mind. But I'm happy to talk with you, and I'm happy to read drafts as you're working, because my job is to help you out, and hopefully not only to make you a stronger writer, but maybe also to strengthen your writing habits and your studying habits. That's also the point of this class, is to kind of transition you into some of these more college level sort of study habits and writing habits. All right. So those are some more general suggestions based partly on questions, excellent questions that I've been getting from a lot of you over email about this first paper. So again, if you have any other questions, send me an email. I'm be happy to make suggestions, watch the other videos, read the directions. And most of all, I look forward to reading these papers when they come in, because that's when I get to really make suggestions on them and give you feedback, really detailed feedback, and grade and everything else. And so again, to sum up, I typically will not talk about grades on a paper until the paper's done, and then I have to put the grade on it. So again, if you ask me what grade you think you're going to get, or I think you're going to get, and I don't answer you, or I sound like my dad again, who's an attorney, and give you if I give you a kind of very vague attorney-like answer, well, we'll just have to see how this paper comes out. Now you know why, because I got in trouble as an undergraduate as a tutor when I actually discussed grades before a paper was done with one of the kids that came in into the peer tutoring center way back in the early 90s. All right, so those are my stories for today. I will talk to you later, and please again, send me an email if you have any questions. See you later. Bye.